"He came to attack us," screamed a man grabbing a stick. Other villagers left their houses to see what was. Some gathered sticks, stones and tools to defend themselves. Timo retreated, his hands still raised. But the crowd came closer, their fear turning into anger. "Catch the nets!" Someone before Timo could react. A thick string of rope was thrown at him. They fought to free, but other nets arrived, surrounding his arms and legs, shouted loudly, his voice resonating throughout the village. "Don't him escape," yelled another man as he tightened his ropes and laid on the timmets desperately. Someone in the crowd. Someone who could help him. For a short while villagers stopped. His cry seemed filled with pain and sadness, but their fear was too strong. They tied him tightly and dragged to an old wooden at the of the village. Timo stopped arguing. He stayed lying down still, his eyes filled with grief. They locked him inside and moved away hastily, their murmurs stumbling away the distance. In the dim light of the house, Timo sat on the ground, his body powerful, exhausted by defeat. He thought of Nanesha, his benevolent and his soft. He had come to save her. But now he was trapped. In the darkness of the old wooden house, Timo remained motionless. His large body was against the rough. His golden once filled curiosity were now thorns of sadness. The ropes around him seemed heavy, like the weight of his failure. Outside, villagers gathered in small groups, speaking in a low voice filled with fear. Some walked nervously, holding sticks and tools, ready, and Timo tried to escape. Others murmured about the white and debated about what they should do with him. "Why did he come here?" asked a man, tightly a spear. "Perhaps he wanted to attack us," answered another, trembling voice. "No animal should look like that or act like that. It's unnatural." But everyone disagreed. An old woman leaning on a stick rubbed her eyebrows, thinking. "He didn't look dangerous," she said gently. "He looked frightened." His words were drowned under stronger voices filled with fear. "We can't take this risk," declared a young man firmly. "It's too dangerous to keep here." A young boy, curious but careful, slowly the house. He looked through the windows of the wall, his big eyes meeting those Timo. For a moment, they looked at the boys began to fade away. Seeing sadness in Timo's, he cried, gently, "The child. What are you doing?" "Back off," grumbled an adult, quickly the child back. The villagers continued to argue, their voices becoming stronger. Some wanted to get rid of Timo, while others hesitated. Finally the village's doyen, Master Baraka, forward. His deep and firm was by the crowd. "Enough," he said with authority. "We cannot act out fear. We must understand why he came here." The villagers were, although their worried fixed on the fence showed that they were always afraid. Inside, Timo heard their voices muffled, but they did understand all there. He lowered his head, his shoulders sagging under the weight of despair. He was afraid of them, he was afraid of Nanesha. She needed him, and he no way of helping her. In his simple little hut, Nanesha was lying down, motionless on her bed. Her body was weak and fragile. The soft golden of the sun, through the cracks of the wooden walls, gently her face. Her breathing was slow and shallow, each breath asking for more effort than the previous one. The hut was silent, except for the light sound of the wind outside. Without Timo, the space seemed emptier and colder than ever. His trembling hand stretched toward thee as if she hoped he would in at any moment. "Timo," she whispered softly, her voice barely stronger than a breath. His tired eyes briefly scrutinizing the room, in search of his dear companion. But he was not there. A wave of sadness filled his heart. She understood why he had left. She knew that Timo had left the hut to seek help, and she was proud of her courage. Deep down she also the truth. Her time had come. Her body had become too weak, and her strength was quickly as she lay down. Timo's filled her mind like a sweet dream. She remembered the day she found her, a little creature frightened, alone in nature. She thought of her games, her kindness, and the light he had brought to her lonely life. He had given her something she thought she had forever. Love and joy. A sweet smile appeared on her lips. "You have so, Timo. You were my support, my family." His hand fell back to his side, too weak to stay up. His breathing slowed down again, each breath lighter and softer than the previous one. In a last delicate, Nanesha closed her eyes. Her face seemed peaceful, as if she had fallen asleep deeply, serenely. The hut became silent. Only the murmur of the wind seemed to his spirit to the skies. Far from there, locked in the hut, Timo shouted, and it was as if he could feel this loss in deepest part of his heart. The world around him seemed heavier, colder and quieter, as if a part of him had just gone out of as the morning sun rose over the village. Timo was sitting in silence in the darkness of the hut. His head hung low. His body was, but his heart himself was agitated. A deep feeling of anxiety was him, as if something horrible had just happened. Outside, Master Baraka, the village's doyen, stood in front of villagers. His calm voice broke the silence. We cannot let fear guide us. If this creature wanted to hurt us, it would have already done. I think it came to seek help. The villagers whispered among themselves, mixture of guilt and fear in their voices. The words of Master Baraka made them question their actions. Finally, a man nodded his head. Maybe we were wrong. Let's him. A small group of villagers approached the warehouse, their tools in hand. With caution they opened the door. A flow of light entered, illuminating Timo's. He blinked, adapting to the brightness, and looked at carefully. A villager moved forward and cut the ropes. You can go, he said slowly, nervously retreating. Timo hesitated for a second. Then without a sound he got and jumped out of the house. His powerful legs propelled towards the savannah. The villagers remained frozen, watching his massive silhouette disappear far. They turned to her. Someone. Timo ran as fast as he could, his heart beating to the point the dry rubbed his legs. But he did slow down. His spirit was fixed on one goal, full of thoughts for Nanesha. His warm, his soft, she needed him. And he had. When Timo reached the hut, the door was slightly open. He slowly stepped and gently the door to open more. What he saw inside made him stop. Nanesha was lying on her bed, her hands on her chest, her face peaceful, as if she was simply. But Timo knew she was. He approached, his big body suddenly small in this silent kneeling next to her. He gently his hand on hers. His hand was cold. A weak sound broke out of his throat, and his golden filled with tears. Timo stayed there for time, his head lowered, as if he was for her to wake up. But she didn't. Hours later, villagers arrived, led by Master Baraka. They entered the hut in silence, their feet light. When they saw Timo kneeling next to Nanesha, their fear turned into sadness. The customs officer put a comforting on Timo's. She's gone, my friend, he said softly. Timo did not. His grief was silent, a deep filling the room, the heart heavy with regret. A woman with gray was a hand in her mouth, eyes shining with tears. We prevented her from being with her, murmured in a trembling voice. We were wrong. No one found the words to justify what they had done. They had thought they were acting to protect their village, but in end, they had only a son tear his mother. When the sun began to behind the hills, Timo slowly the fragile of Nanesha. He walked without a word, holding her with infinite respect, like a son carrying his mother to last home. The villagers followed him in silence, faces covered with shame and regret. Timo slowly the body of Nanesha to a place under a large babo near the hut. Together, they buried her in the shade of the tree she had loved. When the last handful of soil covered the grave, Timo sat next to it, his big hands on the ground. He fixed the mound of soil, his face in a void that words could express. The villagers remained a moment, silently watching, before leaving him alone. The days that followed the burial of Nanesha, Timo stayed close to his grave. He did not. His big silhouette sitting quietly under the baobab. The villagers kept their distance, but their feelings for Timo had changed. Fear had been replaced by guilt, sadness, and even respect for the loyalty of this creature, who had loved Nanesha. In the following days, some villagers began to approach him with small gestures of kindness. A woman left a basket of fruit near the tomb. Curious sat near, watching in silence while he was resting under the tree. Little by little, fear of the villagers disappeared, replaced by admiration. One evening, the sky shone with golden and orange. Timo finally up. He walked to the edge of the village and sat there, watching the vastness of the savannah. The villagers saw this as a silent not that he was, but he would over them, as he had watched over Nanesha. Over the weeks, Timo began to roam around the village outskirts. First, the villagers remained suspicious. They soon noticed that it was not a danger. Timo hunted wild that threatened their cattle, and during the dry he evened them by leading them to a hidden of it's just an animal, said man to Master Baraka one evening. He is ours now. Master Baraka looked up while watching Timo sitting near the tomb of Nanesha. his eyes losing sight of the horizon. It was never a danger, said the Doyot. It was a blessing. The days of 20 weeks whose massive was out under the light of the crepuscle. The old put a kind on his shoulder. This is his son. That night, under the stars, the wind blew through the branches of the baobab, carrying a light murmur, like a sweet laugh from the past. Over time, Timo became the silent of the village. His presence brought comfort and security to the inhabitants of Kora. For them, Timo was more than a protector. He was family,